Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Nerd Kingdom. Today we are going to be... Wait a second. Do you see what's behind me? We have passed another subscriber goal. 2 years since my last video, and we are still hitting goals and milestones on this channel. Enough delay. The reason why I have returned from my exile to do another video on this channel, apart from the usual excuses about life settling down a little bit and getting less busy, is because recently I have been running my players through a mega dungeon that I designed using some incredible maps I found online. The maps that you're looking at right now, in fact. And during this process, I found that I was having a much better game. Not only I was having a better game, but my players were having a much better time than they have in the last few sessions. And it made me start thinking about dungeons. Because these places in our games are the epitome of exploration. You go from one room to another, exploring the different corridors and aspects, all the factions in between. And this design feature can be applied to so many other aspects of the game. So when we're talking about making exploration interesting and not boring, you can take a lot of the same features that a dungeon has and apply it to other parts of exploration in your TTRPG game. And I'll show you how to do that in this video. So right here we have a hex map of the Nente Vale. And I'm going to start this by saying that if your group doesn't like exploration or it's not a big part of your game, then don't include it. And if your group are a high level and they've got an airship, then you don't need to have exploration be a big part of the game, because the best way to incorporate exploration into a TTRPG game or a D&D game is to make it a part of the adventure, turn it into something fun that the players can do. Okay, so you've decided you want to incorporate exploration into your game, and you want to make it an active and interesting part of your campaign. Well, what you need to do is set yourself up a hex map. That's going to make traveling from one point to another a lot more interesting. It's going to make it really clear for you and your players where everything is and the distance between them. I have established rules for my players. I have it so that every day of traveling, they roll a dice, usually a d8, and the number that they need to roll goes down. I've shown those rules on the screen for you now. So the first day they travel, if they roll above a 7, then there's an encounter. The next day, if they roll above a 6, there's an encounter. Next day, if they roll above a 5, and so on. The way this works is that if they go on long journeys, there's more likely to be an encounter. So it encourages them to plan journeys strategically, going from safe haven to safe haven. But it also reminds them that exploration is dangerous. At some point, they are going to end up with an encounter, and these encounters can be both good and bad. I don't allow my players to travel more spaces than they have rations for. So just incorporating this method alone, if my players want to travel from Fallcrest to the Witchlight Fens, they can see how many days it's going to take them, how many rations they're going to need, and they understand that how dangerous the journey might be. When they get to the Witchlight Fens, however, things are going to change. And I mentioned that there could be random encounters on the road. So this is how I use random encounters in wilderness situations like this. I use something called a hex flower. Now, a hex flower is really cool and it's really interesting. And it allows me to put in my notes for a session potential encounters that I like the sound of that would fit this area, that would fit the entirety of the Nente Vale region. And then I just plan out the different factions, I have them color-coded, and I roll 2 dice, and I know that they're more likely to end up with certain faction interactions than others. And it allows me to have a really interesting and varied back and forth between the factions that the players encounter and the types of random encounters that they experience. But there's a nice bit of randomness to it that mean that I have variety, and I don't have to think of everything on the spot, because there's enough variations in my planning that by choosing the trend, I can decide on the level of difficulty that encounter is likely to have. You see, when my players eventually reach the Witchlight Fens, I'm going to change my strategy. No longer am I going to be using random encounter tables, but I want the adventure to feel more planned. I can still use a hex map to determine distance, but this time I'm going to structure my planning in terms of a dungeon. I'm going to have set scenarios. I'm going to have different paths leading to those set scenarios. I'm going to have specific encounters that reflect how dangerous and difficult and scary this sort of atmosphere is. I'm going to plan it like a dungeon, even though this could be taking place in a swamp or a forest or a desert. I'm going to have specific interactions that I want my players to have and different routes that they can take. This way I have a huge level of control over the adventure. My players are still free to travel from the strange lights, which could be an interesting roleplay scenario, and travel directly to the Hydra's lair, skipping the witch's hut. But if they decide to do that, then I can roll on a random encounter table. This system of doing exploration works really well because you're taking the design structure of things like dungeons and applying it to something that isn't a dungeon but still requires that level of exploration. It works really well in towns and cities. I would lean towards using it in cities more than smaller villages and things. I would separate that city into regions, different districts that have their own unique feel. And then I would plan out the encounters based around that, almost like you're planning out different levels of a mega dungeon. And as you can see by my crudely drawn examples, these all work fine and would allow players to have interesting interactions as they are exploring through a city. However, what I also offer my players are ways of getting around a city that allows them to just skip all these encounters in general, essentially fast traveling to where they want to be, so that they don't have to worry about dealing with these different encounters when they just want to get from point A to point B quickly. My other tip is to use art where you're able to. Because we are very visual people and we understand and feel things so much more through seeing them visually, I recommend using art wherever possible. Setting up a group chat and using that as a way of distributing media is a great way to set the tone and the feel of an area. If I show you a map from Bloodborne, this is a very different style or feeling place by just the overland map than it is when you're walking around it and exploring it and able to look at different aspects of this place. So you need to use art and visual images to try and set that scene. And that's the final tip that I've got. So as a quick recap, using hex maps and random roll tables as a way to do overland travel is a great way to get players from one key location to another. As soon as players get into a key location, be that a forest, a desert, a mountain region, set that up as a dungeon and run it like you would in dungeon. You already know how to do the planning for those places, so use the knowledge you already have. Set up new paths and secret entrances and new ways of getting from one place to another. Set up interesting combat encounters in different rooms, quote unquote. This will make your exploration really interesting and evocative. Use new descriptions for different places. All these things will work together to help make your game feel really exciting and full and rich. And then add some art pieces where you're able to set a scene visually and thematically for your players. Well, it's been a long time leading up to this video, and thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this helpful in some way, and this is currently how I do exploration in my games and what I found works really well. I'm hoping it's not going to be so long until the next video. I'm going to try and do one video a month. I don't run any advertisements at the start of the videos, so if you've enjoyed this, please like and subscribe. It's the community interaction that I get the most out of. So thank you again so much for your time and have a great day.